As you settle into this moment, feel the surface beneath you supporting your weight. Notice your breath moving in and out, steady and automatic. Your body is here, holding you, sustaining you without effort or thought. Each breath flows through airways you may never have seen, delivering oxygen to places you may never have touched. And tonight, we explore this body not as a collection of parts to memorize, but as a living landscape that has been your home since your first moment of existence. The human body is an architecture of extraordinary precision. It is a city of 70 trillion cells, each one humming with activity, each one part of something vastly larger than itself. It is a network of systems flowing together like rivers joining into one current, a symphony where every instrument plays its part in silence, in coordination, in perfect timing. We carry this complexity with us everywhere, yet most of it remains invisible to us, working quietly beneath our awareness. Tonight, we will journey slowly through this landscape. We will move from the largest structures to the smallest units, from skin to cell, from bone to molecule. We will explore 11 major systems, each one essential, each one interconnected with all the others. We will see how structure shapes function, how form follows purpose, how every detail serves the whole. And we will do this gently, without urgency, allowing understanding to build layer by layer, the way the body itself was built, cell upon cell, tissue upon tissue, system upon system. Anatomy is the study of structure. The word itself comes from ancient Greek, meaning to cut apart, because for thousands of years, understanding the body meant looking inside it, mapping its territories, naming its regions. Yet anatomy is not merely about parts. It is about relationships, about how things fit together, how they support one another, how one structure enables the function of another. The heart sits protected within the cage of ribs not by accident, but by design. The brain floats cushioned in fluid, not for decoration, but for protection. Every placement, every connection, every angle and curve exists because it serves life. We are built on principles that recur throughout nature. The branching of blood vessels mirrors the branching of trees. The spiral of DNA echoes the spiral of shells. The folding of our intestines maximizes surface area, just as the folding of mountains maximizes geological contact. Patterns repeat at different scales because they work, because they solve problems efficiently, because evolution has tested them across billions of years and found them reliable. Consider for a moment your hand, resting somewhere near you. This hand is not a simple thing. It contains 27 bones, each one precisely shaped, each one articulating with its neighbors through joints wrapped in ligaments and lubricated with fluid. Muscles weave through the hand and extend into the forearm, their tendons sliding through sheaths, pulling bones into complex coordinated movements. Blood vessels branch smaller and smaller, delivering nutrients and oxygen to every cell. Nerves thread through the tissues, carrying sensation inward and commands outward. Skin wraps the entire structure, flexible enough to bend, tough enough to protect, sensitive enough to detect textures finer than any machine can measure. This hand, which you might take for granted, represents millions of years of refinement, thousands of components working as one. And your hand is merely one part of you. Let us begin our exploration with the concept of organization, because the body builds itself in levels. At the smallest scale, we find atoms: carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, nitrogen, phosphorus, sulfur, and trace elements, each one an entity in itself, yet meaningless alone. Atoms bond together to form molecules. Some molecules are simple, like water, composed of 2 hydrogen atoms and 1 oxygen atom, present in every cell, making up 60% of your mass, the medium in which all chemistry occurs. Other molecules are vast, like proteins, chains of hundreds or thousands of atoms folded into precise 3-dimensional shapes, each fold critical to function, each shape a key that fits specific locks. Molecules organize into structures called organelles, tiny organs within cells. The mitochondria, often called the powerhouses of the cell, are organelles where fuel molecules are broken down and energy is captured in forms the cell can use. The endoplasmic reticulum is a network of membranes where proteins are assembled and modified. The Golgi apparatus packages proteins for transport. The nucleus holds DNA, the blueprint written in chemical code, 4 letters repeated 3 billion times in sequences that spell out instructions for building and maintaining you. Cells are the next level of organization. Your body contains approximately 37 trillion cells, though this number is difficult to verify and represents an educated estimate. Each cell is enclosed in a membrane, a boundary that separates inside from outside. Yet this boundary is not a wall, but a sophisticated interface. Channels in the membrane open and close, allowing specific substances to enter or exit. Receptors dot the surface, sensing signals from other cells, from hormones, from the environment. The cell is simultaneously isolated and connected, independent and part of a community. Cells of similar type cluster together to form tissues. Epithelial tissue covers surfaces, lining your skin, your digestive tract, your airways, creating barriers between you and the world. Connective tissue, in its many forms, provides support and structure. Bone is connective tissue hardened with minerals. Blood is connective tissue in liquid form. Cartilage is connective tissue with a gel-like flexibility. Muscle tissue contracts, generating force and movement. Nervous tissue processes information, conducting electrical signals at speeds approaching 100 meters per second. Tissues combine to form organs. An organ is a structure with a defined shape and function, composed of multiple tissue types working together. Your heart, about the size of your fist, contains muscle tissue that contracts rhythmically, nervous tissue that coordinates the rhythm, connective tissue that forms the framework and valves, epithelial tissue that lines the chambers. Each tissue contributes to the heart's function as a pump, and without any one of these tissues, the heart cannot fulfill its purpose. Organs work together in systems, and it is at the system level that we begin to see the true integration of the body. The cardiovascular system, for instance, includes not only the heart, but also thousands of miles of blood vessels, arteries branching into arterioles, into capillaries, then collecting back into venules and veins, a closed loop that reaches every tissue. The respiratory system brings oxygen into the body and removes carbon dioxide, but it cannot work alone. It depends on the cardiovascular system to transport gases, on the nervous system to regulate breathing, on the muscular system to power the movements of inhalation and exhalation. There are 11 major systems traditionally identified in human anatomy, though these divisions are somewhat artificial because the systems overlap and interact continuously. These systems are the integumentary system, which includes skin, hair, and nails; the skeletal system, the framework of bones that supports and protects; the muscular system, which generates movement and heat; the nervous system, the body's communication network; the endocrine system, which uses hormones to regulate function, the cardiovascular system, the transport network for blood, the lymphatic system, which manages fluid balance and immunity, the respiratory system, responsible for gas exchange, the digestive system, which processes food into usable nutrients, the urinary system, which filters blood and removes waste, and the reproductive system, which enables the continuation of the species. Each system deserves attention, and we will give it. But before we dive into specifics, let us acknowledge the principle that unites them all: integration. No system operates in isolation. The digestive system breaks down food, but the cardiovascular system transports the nutrients. The respiratory system brings in oxygen, but the cardiovascular system delivers it to cells. The nervous system detects danger, but the endocrine system releases hormones that prepare the body to respond. The muscular system moves the skeleton, but the nervous system commands the muscles. Remove any one system, and the others cannot maintain life for long. This integration is so fundamental that it shapes the very structure of anatomy. Consider the blood supply. Every organ, every tissue, every cell requires nutrients and oxygen delivered by blood. Therefore, blood vessels branch throughout the body, reaching everywhere, forming a network so extensive that if you could lay out all your blood vessels end to end, they would stretch approximately 100,000 kilometers, enough to circle the Earth 2.5 times. This is not excess. This is necessity. Every cell sits within a fraction of a millimeter from a capillary because oxygen and nutrients cannot travel far through tissue without the active transport blood provides. Similarly, consider innervation. The nervous system sends axons, long thread-like extensions of nerve cells, throughout the body. These axons carry signals that coordinate activity, regulate function, and gather sensory information. Nearly every tissue contains nerve fibers because nearly every tissue must be responsive to the body's needs. Muscles must receive commands to contract. Glands must receive signals to secrete. Organs must report their status back to the brain. This wiring, this constant flow of information, is what allows the body to respond to change, to maintain balance, to adapt. The concept of homeostasis is central to understanding why the body is structured as it is. Homeostasis means maintaining stability within a changing environment. Your body temperature remains around 37 degrees Celsius whether you are in a cold room or a hot one. Your blood pH stays between 7.35 and 7.45, a narrow range critical to enzyme function and cellular chemistry. Your blood glucose levels fluctuate within bounds, rising after meals, falling between meals, but always returning to baseline. This stability is not passive. It is achieved through constant monitoring and constant adjustment, through feedback loops involving sensors, control centers, and effectors working in coordination across multiple systems. Let us turn now to the first of our systems, the integumentary system, because it is the system you see, the system that forms the boundary between inside and outside, between self and world. The word integument means covering, and your skin is the largest organ of your body, weighing approximately 4 kilograms, covering roughly 2 square meters of surface area. Skin is more than a wrapper. It is a barrier, a sensor, a regulator, a synthesizer, and a protector. Skin consists of 2 main layers, the epidermis and the dermis, resting on a deeper layer of subcutaneous tissue. The epidermis is the outermost layer, composed of epithelial cells arranged in multiple strata. These cells are born in the deepest layer, the stratum basal, where stem cells divide continuously. As new cells form, older cells are pushed upward toward the surface. During this journey, the cells change. They fill with a tough protein called keratin. They lose their nuclei and organelles. They flatten and harden. By the time they reach the surface, they are dead, forming a protective layer called the stratum corneum. These dead cells eventually shed, flaking away unnoticed, and are replaced by cells rising from below. Your entire epidermis renews itself approximately every 4 weeks, a quiet cycle of death and regeneration happening continuously. The dermis lies beneath the epidermis, thicker and more complex. It is connective tissue rich in collagen and elastin, proteins that provide strength and elasticity. The dermis contains blood vessels that nourish the epidermis above, which has no blood supply of its own. It contains nerve endings that detect touch, pressure, temperature, and pain. It contains hair follicles, tiny pits in the skin from which hair grows, and sebaceous glands that secrete an oily substance called sebum that lubricates hair and skin. It contains sweat glands, of which there are 2 types: eccrine glands that produce watery sweat for cooling, and apocrine glands that produce thicker sweat in response to stress or emotion. Beneath the dermis lies subcutaneous tissue, also called the hypodermis, a layer of loose connective tissue and adipose tissue, which is fat. This layer insulates, cushions, and stores energy. The thickness of this layer varies across the body and between individuals, thicker in some regions, thinner in others, responsive to diet and metabolism. Skin does far more than cover. It prevents water loss, crucial because we are approximately 60% water and would dehydrate rapidly without this barrier. It blocks the entry of pathogens, bacteria, and viruses that coat every surface we touch, every breath we take. The acidity of skin, combined with antimicrobial substances secreted by glands, creates an environment hostile to many microbes. Skin regulates temperature through sweat and through control of blood flow to the surface. When you are hot, blood vessels in the dermis dilate, bringing more blood to the surface where heat can radiate away. When you are cold, these vessels constrict, conserving heat. Sweat glands activate when temperature rises, releasing fluid that evaporates and cools the skin. Skin synthesizes vitamin D when exposed to ultraviolet light from the sun. A molecule in the skin absorbs UV radiation and transforms into an active form of vitamin D, which is essential for calcium absorption and bone health. This process links the integumentary system to the skeletal system, an example of the interconnections that weave through anatomy. Skin senses the world. Scattered throughout the dermis are various types of sensory receptors, each specialized to detect different stimuli. Mechanoreceptors respond to touch and pressure. Some detect light touch, others deep pressure, others vibration. Thermoreceptors detect temperature changes. Nociceptors detect pain, responding to intense stimuli that signal potential tissue damage. These receptors connect to nerve fibers that carry signals to the spinal cord and brain, where sensation becomes conscious experience. The density of receptors varies across the body. Your fingertips contain far more touch receptors than your back, which is why fingertips are so sensitive and back is not. This distribution reflects function. Hands explore the world, requiring fine sensory discrimination. Hair, though often considered merely aesthetic, serves functions. Hair on the scalp protects from UV radiation and provides some insulation. Eyelashes protect eyes from debris. Hair in nostrils and ears traps particles. Hair follicles are associated with tiny muscles called erector pili. When these muscles contract, hair stands upright, a phenomenon you may recognize as goosebumps. In animals with thick fur, this response traps air and provides insulation. In humans, with relatively little body hair, it is largely vestigial, a remnant of our evolutionary past. Nails are modifications of the epidermis, hardened plates of keratin that protect the tips of fingers and toes and assist in gripping small objects. Nails grow from a region called the nail matrix, hidden beneath skin at the base of the nail. Cells in the matrix divide and keratinize, forming the nail plate that slides forward over the nail bed. Fingernails grow approximately 3 millimeters per month, toenails slower. Damage to the nail matrix can result in permanent changes to nail growth, while damage to the nail plate itself is temporary as new nail replaces old. The integumentary system also plays a role in immunity. Cells within the epidermis, called Langerhans cells, are part of the immune system. They detect foreign antigens and help initiate immune responses. Skin is, in many ways, the first line of defense, a literal wall between your internal environment and the external world teeming with potential threats. Now let us move inward to the skeletal system, the framework that gives your body its shape, that supports your weight, that protects your most vital organs. The adult human skeleton contains 206 bones, though this number varies slightly between individuals and changes with age. Infants are born with approximately 270 bones, many of which are cartilage that will later ossify and fuse into fewer, larger bones. The skull, for instance, consists of multiple bones that fuse during childhood, creating the solid cranial vault that protects the brain. Bone is living tissue, dynamic and responsive. It is not the dry, brittle material you might imagine from museum skeletons. Living bone is about 50% water and contains cells, blood vessels, and nerves. Bone constantly remodels itself, breaking down old tissue and building new tissue in response to stress and hormonal signals. This remodeling allows bone to adapt. Weight-bearing exercise stimulates bone formation, making bones denser and stronger. Prolonged inactivity or weightlessness, as astronauts experience, causes bone loss. Bones serve multiple functions. They provide structure, forming the scaffolding that supports soft tissues and maintains body shape. They enable movement by providing attachment points for muscles and acting as levers that amplify the force muscles generate. They protect vital organs. The skull encases the brain, the rib cage shields the heart and lungs, the vertebrae surround and protect the spinal cord. Bones store minerals, primarily calcium and phosphorus, releasing them into the bloodstream as needed to maintain balance. Bone marrow, found within certain bones, produces blood cells, a process called hematopoiesis. Red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets all originate in bone marrow. Bones vary greatly in size, shape, and function. Long bones, like the femur in your thigh or the humerus in your upper arm, are longer than they are wide, designed to support weight and facilitate movement. Short bones, like those in your wrist and ankle, are roughly cube-shaped, providing stability and some movement. Flat bones, like the skull, ribs, and scapulae, protect organs and provide broad surfaces for muscle attachment. Irregular bones, like the vertebrae, have complex shapes suited to specific functions. The structure of a typical long bone illustrates the sophistication of skeletal design. The shaft, or diaphysis, is a hollow tube of compact bone, dense and strong. This tubular design is mechanically efficient, providing maximum strength with minimum weight, the same principle used in engineering structures like bridges and airplane wings. The hollow interior contains bone marrow. At each end of the bone, the epiphyses, is spongy bone, also called cancellous or trabecular bone, a lattice of thin, bony struts called trabeculi arranged along lines of stress. This spongy architecture is lighter than solid bone, but still provides strength. The ends are capped with articular cartilage, smooth and slippery, reducing friction where bones meet at joints. Surrounding the bone is a membrane called the periosteum, rich in blood vessels and nerves. The periosteum nourishes bone and serves as an attachment site for tendons and ligaments. Inside the bone, lining the marrow cavity, is the endosteum, a thinner membrane involved in bone growth and repair. Bone tissue itself consists of cells embedded in a matrix. The matrix is approximately 1/3 organic material, primarily collagen, which provides flexibility and tensile strength, and 2/3 inorganic mineral salts, primarily calcium phosphate crystals, which provide hardness and compressive strength. This combination makes bone both strong and somewhat flexible, able to absorb impacts without shattering. 3 main types of cells inhabit bone. Osteoblasts build bone, secreting the organic matrix and promoting mineralization. Osteocytes are mature bone cells, former osteoblasts that have become embedded in the matrix they created. Osteocytes maintain the bone matrix and detect mechanical stress, communicating with other bone cells to coordinate remodeling. Osteoclasts break down bone, secreting acids and enzymes that dissolve matrix. This might seem destructive, but it is essential. Remodeling removes old or damaged bone and releases stored minerals. The balance between osteoblast and osteoclast activity determines whether bone mass increases, decreases, or remains stable. The skeleton divides into 2 parts: the axial skeleton and the appendicular skeleton. The axial skeleton forms the central axis of the body and includes the skull, vertebral column, and rib cage. The appendicular skeleton includes the bones of the limbs and the girdles that attach them to the axial skeleton. The pectoral girdle, consisting of the clavicles and scapulae, and the pelvic girdle, consisting of the hip bones. The skull is a complex structure of 22 bones. 8 bones form the cranium, the portion that encloses the brain. 14 bones form the facial skeleton. Most skull bones are joined by immovable joints called sutures, interlocking seams that you can feel as ridges on your scalp. Only the mandible, the lower jaw, is freely movable, articulating with the temporal bones at the temporomandibular joints, allowing the opening and closing movements necessary for chewing and speaking. The vertebral column, or spine, consists of 33 bones in childhood, though several fuse in adulthood, leaving 26 separate bones. These vertebrae are divided into regions: 7 cervical vertebrae in the neck, 12 thoracic vertebrae in the chest, 5 lumbar vertebrae in the lower back, 5 fused sacral vertebrae forming the sacrum, and 4 fused coccygeal vertebrae forming the coccyx, or tailbone. The vertebrae are separated by intervertebral discs, pads of fibrocartilage that act as shock absorbers and allow flexibility. The vertebral column supports the head, protects the spinal cord, and provides attachment points for ribs and muscles. It curves in an S shape when viewed from the side, curves that develop as we grow and begin to hold up our heads and walk, curves that help distribute weight and absorb shock. The rib cage consists of 12 pairs of ribs, the sternum or breastbone, and the thoracic vertebrae. The first 7 pairs of ribs attach directly to the sternum via costal cartilage and are called true ribs. The next 3 pairs attach to the cartilage of the rib above and are called false ribs. The last 2 pairs do not attach to the sternum at all and are called floating ribs. The rib cage protects the heart, lungs, and major blood vessels, and its movements during breathing expand and contract the thoracic cavity, facilitating ventilation. The appendicular skeleton, the bones of the limbs, enables mobility. The upper limb includes the humerus, radius, ulna, carpals, metacarpals, and phalanges. The lower limb includes the femur, patella, tibia, fibula, tarsals, metatarsals, and phalanges. The limbs attach to the axial skeleton through girdles. The pectoral girdle, consisting of the clavicle and scapula on each side, is relatively light and mobile, allowing the wide range of shoulder motion. The pelvic girdle, consisting of the hip bones, each formed by the fusion of 3 bones called the ilium, ischium, and pubis, is much stronger and more stable, designed to support the weight of the upper body and withstand the forces of walking and running. Joints, or articulations, are where bones meet. Some joints allow no movement, like the sutures of the skull. Some allow slight movement, like the intervertebral joints. Some allow free movement, like the shoulder, hip, knee, and elbow. Freely movable joints, called synovial joints, share certain features. The bone ends are covered with articular cartilage. The joint is enclosed in a fibrous joint capsule. The inner layer of the capsule, the synovial membrane, secretes synovial fluid, a lubricant that reduces friction. Ligaments, bands of tough connective tissue, reinforce the joint and limit movement to prevent injury. Synovial joints are classified by the movements they allow. Hinge joints, like the elbow and knee, allow bending and straightening in one plane. Pivot joints allow rotation around a single axis. Ball and socket joints, like the shoulder and hip, allow movement in multiple planes and rotation, providing the greatest range of motion. Saddle joints, gliding joints, and condyloid joints each have their own characteristic movements. Movement itself is the product of muscles pulling on bones. Let us now turn to the muscular system, the system that generates force, that enables everything from the beating of your heart to the blink of your eye to the lifting of a heavy weight. There are 3 types of muscle tissue in the body: skeletal, cardiac, and smooth, each with distinct structure and function. Skeletal muscle is attached to bones and produces voluntary movement. It is called skeletal because it moves the skeleton, and voluntary because it is under conscious control. Though many skeletal muscle actions occur reflexively or without conscious thought. Skeletal muscle tissue appears striated under a microscope, striped with alternating light and dark bands, a pattern that reflects the organization of contractile proteins within the cells. A skeletal muscle is an organ composed of muscle tissue, connective tissue, blood vessels, and nerves. The muscle cells themselves are called muscle fibers, long cylindrical cells that can span the entire length of the muscle. Each fiber contains multiple nuclei and is packed with myofibrils, thread-like structures that run the length of the fiber. Myofibrils, in turn, are composed of repeating units called sarcomeres, the functional units of contraction. A sarcomere contains 2 main types of protein filaments: thick filaments made of myosin and thin filaments made primarily of actin. These filaments are arranged in a precise overlapping pattern. When a muscle contracts, the myosin filaments pull the actin filaments toward the center of the sarcomere, shortening the sarcomere and thus shortening the muscle fiber. This sliding filament mechanism, powered by energy from ATP, is how all muscle contraction occurs. Contraction is triggered by a signal from a nerve. Each muscle fiber is innervated by a single motor neuron, an axon that extends from the spinal cord to the muscle. The connection between neuron and muscle fiber is called the neuromuscular junction. When a nerve impulse reaches this junction, the neuron releases a chemical messenger called acetylcholine, which binds to receptors on the muscle fiber membrane. This initiates a cascade of events that ultimately causes calcium ions to flood into the muscle fiber. Calcium binds to proteins on the actin filaments, exposing binding sites for myosin. Myosin heads attach to actin, pivot, pull, detach, and reattach in a cycle that continues as long as calcium and ATP are present. Muscles work in groups. Most movements require the coordinated action of multiple muscles. Muscles are often arranged in antagonistic pairs, where one muscle produces a movement and another produces the opposite movement. For example, the biceps brachii, located on the front of the upper arm, flexes the elbow, bringing the hand toward the shoulder. The triceps brachii on the back of the upper arm extends the elbow, straightening the arm. To bend your elbow, your biceps contracts while your triceps relaxes. To straighten your elbow, the roles reverse. This push-pull arrangement is fundamental to joint movement. Skeletal muscles also maintain posture. Even when you are standing still, muscles are contracting to stabilize joints and keep you upright against gravity. These contractions are often low-level and continuous, a constant background activity called muscle tone. Muscle tone is maintained by the nervous system, which sends a steady stream of signals to muscles, activating small numbers of muscle fibers at a time in a rotating pattern, so that individual fibers can rest while others work. Muscles generate heat. Muscle contraction is not perfectly efficient. Much of the energy from ATP is released as heat. This heat production is crucial for maintaining body temperature. When you shiver, your muscles are contracting rapidly in small, involuntary movements, specifically to generate heat and warm your body. Cardiac muscle is found only in the heart. It shares some features with skeletal muscle, including a striated appearance, but it differs in important ways. Cardiac muscle cells are shorter, branched, and interconnected by junctions called intercalated discs. These discs allow electrical signals to pass rapidly from cell to cell, enabling the heart to contract as a coordinated unit. Cardiac muscle is involuntary. It contracts rhythmically without conscious control, driven by intrinsic electrical activity generated by specialized cells called pacemaker cells. The heart will continue to beat even if removed from the body, as long as it receives oxygen and nutrients. Smooth muscle is found in the walls of hollow organs and tubes, the digestive tract, blood vessels, airways, bladder, and uterus. Smooth muscle cells are small, spindle-shaped, and lack striations. Like cardiac muscle, smooth muscle is involuntary. It contracts slowly and can sustain contraction for long periods with relatively little energy expenditure. Smooth muscle in blood vessel walls regulates blood flow and blood pressure by constricting or dilating vessels. Smooth muscle in the digestive tract moves food through the system via waves of contraction called peristalsis. Smooth muscle in the airways regulates airflow to the lungs. The approximately 600 skeletal muscles in the human body vary enormously in size and function. The largest muscle, the gluteus maximus in the buttocks, powers hip extension and climbing. The smallest muscle, the stapedius in the middle ear, stabilizes a tiny bone involved in hearing. Some muscles are powerful, capable of generating immense force. Some are precise, capable of delicate movements like threading a needle or playing a musical instrument. Muscles have names that often describe their location, shape, size, action, number of origins, or the bones they attach to. The sternocleidomastoid, a muscle in the neck, is named for its attachments to the sternum, clavicle, and mastoid process of the temporal bone. The deltoid, covering the shoulder, is named for its triangular shape, resembling the Greek letter delta. The biceps brachii has 2 heads or origins. Understanding these naming conventions makes the vast number of muscles somewhat less overwhelming. As we move through these systems, notice how each builds upon and connects to the others. The skeletal system provides the framework, the leverage, the protection. The muscular system provides the force, the movement, the heat. But both depend on the nervous system for coordination, on the cardiovascular system for delivery of oxygen and nutrients, on the respiratory system for gas exchange, on the digestive system for fuel. The body is not a collection of independent systems, but a unified whole, and anatomy is the study of how structure creates that unity. We have moved from the surface, from skin, inward to bone to muscle. We have begun to see the layers of organization, the principles of integration. As we continue, we will explore the systems that communicate, that transport, that process, that regulate, each one adding another dimension to our understanding of this remarkable architecture we inhabit. We have walked gently through the foundations, through skin and bone and muscle, through the structures that give shape and enable movement. Now we continue deeper into the systems that communicate across distances, that transport materials to every corner of the body, that coordinate the vast complexity of 70 trillion cells into a single, coherent organism. We turn our attention to the nervous system, to the cardiovascular system, to the intricate networks that connect every part to the whole. The nervous system is perhaps the most complex structure in the known universe. Your brain alone contains approximately 86 billion neurons, nerve cells specialized for communication, each one forming connections with thousands of other neurons, creating a network of trillions of synapses, junctions, where information flows from one cell to another. This network generates thought, memory, emotion, consciousness itself. It processes the flood of sensory information streaming in from your body and the world. It commands muscles, regulates organs, maintains homeostasis. It is the conductor of the symphony, the central processor coordinating all other systems. The nervous system divides into 2 main parts: the central nervous system and the peripheral nervous system. The central nervous system consists of the brain and spinal cord, the command centers where information is integrated and decisions are made. The peripheral nervous system consists of all the nerves extending from the brain and spinal cord to the rest of the body, the communication lines carrying signals in both directions. Let us begin with the neuron, the fundamental unit of the nervous system. A neuron is a cell unlike any other, highly specialized for its function. It has 3 main parts: the cell body, or soma, containing the nucleus and most organelles, dendrites, branched extensions that receive signals from other neurons, and an axon, a single long extension that carries signals away from the cell body toward other cells. Axons can be remarkably long. A single motor neuron extending from your spinal cord to your foot has an axon over 1 meter in length, though the cell body is microscopic. Neurons communicate through electrical and chemical signals. Within a neuron, information travels as an electrical impulse called an action potential, a wave of voltage change that sweeps along the axon at speeds ranging from less than 1 meter per second in some neurons to over 100 meters per second in others. This speed depends partly on the diameter of the axon and partly on whether the axon is myelinated. Myelin is a fatty insulating layer wrapped around many axons by supporting cells called glial cells. Myelin acts like insulation on a wire, allowing the electrical signal to jump rapidly from one gap to the next, greatly increasing transmission speed. Between neurons, information travels chemically across the synapse. When an action potential reaches the end of an axon, it triggers the release of neurotransmitters, chemical messengers stored in tiny sacs called vesicles. These neurotransmitters diffuse across the narrow synaptic cleft, the gap between neurons, and bind to receptors on the receiving neuron. This binding can either excite the receiving neuron, making it more likely to fire its own action potential, or inhibit it, making it less likely to fire. Each neuron integrates thousands of excitatory and inhibitory inputs every second, summing them to determine whether to fire. There are dozens of different neurotransmitters, each with distinct effects. Acetylcholine triggers muscle contraction and is involved in attention and memory. Dopamine is associated with reward, motivation, and movement control. Serotonin affects mood, appetite, and sleep. GABA, gamma-aminobutyric acid, is the main inhibitory neurotransmitter in the brain, reducing neural activity and promoting calmness. Glutamate is the main excitatory neurotransmitter, increasing neural activity. Imbalances in neurotransmitter levels or receptor sensitivity underlie many neurological and psychiatric conditions. Glial cells, or neuroglia, outnumber neurons in the nervous system and provide essential support. Astrocytes, star-shaped cells, maintain the chemical environment around neurons, regulate blood flow, and form part of the blood-brain barrier, a selective barrier that protects the brain from harmful substances in the blood. Oligodendrocytes in the central nervous system and Schwann cells in the peripheral nervous system produce myelin. Microglia are immune cells that protect the nervous system from pathogens and clear away debris. Ependymal cells line the cavities within the brain and spinal cord and produce cerebrospinal fluid. The brain, weighing approximately 1.4 kilograms, is protected by the skull, cushioned by cerebrospinal fluid, and divided into several major regions, each with specialized functions. The cerebrum, the largest part, is divided into two hemispheres connected by a thick band of nerve fibers called the corpus callosum. The surface of the cerebrum, the cerebral cortex, is a thin layer of gray matter, tissue rich in neuron cell bodies, folded into ridges called gyri and grooves called sulci. This folding increases surface area, packing more neurons into the limited space within the skull. The cerebral cortex is divided into 4 lobes on each side. The frontal lobe at the front is involved in executive functions like planning, decision-making, and impulse control, as well as voluntary movement and speech production. The parietal lobe, behind the frontal lobe, processes sensory information related to touch, temperature, pain, and body position. The temporal lobe on the side is involved in hearing, memory, and emotion. The occipital lobe at the back processes visual information. Specific areas within these lobes have been mapped to particular functions, though the brain works as an integrated network rather than isolated modules. Beneath the cortex lies white matter, tissue rich in myelinated axons that connect different brain regions. Deeper still are clusters of gray matter called basal ganglia, involved in controlling movement and certain aspects of learning and emotion. The thalamus, a pair of oval structures near the center of the brain, acts as a relay station, receiving sensory information and directing it to appropriate areas of the cortex. The hypothalamus, below the thalamus, regulates fundamental drives and states: hunger, thirst, body temperature, sleep-wake cycles, and hormonal balance. Though small, the hypothalamus exerts enormous influence over behavior and physiology. The limbic system, a group of interconnected structures including the hippocampus and amygdala, is central to emotion and memory. The hippocampus is critical for forming new, long-term memories, particularly memories of facts and events. Damage to the hippocampus results in an inability to form new memories, though old memories may remain intact. The amygdala processes emotions, especially fear, and attaches emotional significance to experiences, which is why emotionally charged events are often remembered more vividly than neutral ones. The brainstem, connecting the brain to the spinal cord, controls many vital functions. The midbrain coordinates visual and auditory reflexes and regulates arousal. The pons contains nuclei involved in breathing, sleep, and facial sensation. The medulla oblongata controls heart rate, blood pressure, breathing rhythm, and reflexes like swallowing, coughing, and vomiting. These functions continue automatically even during sleep, even when the higher brain is unconscious. The cerebellum, attached to the back of the brainstem, coordinates movement, balance, and posture. It receives input from sensory systems and from the cerebral cortex, compares intended movements with actual movements, and makes corrections in real time. Damage to the cerebellum results in clumsy, uncoordinated movements and difficulty maintaining balance, though it does not cause paralysis. Walking, reaching, speaking clearly, all require cerebellar coordination. The spinal cord extending from the brainstem down through the vertebral column is both a conduit and a processing center. Ascending tracts carry sensory information from the body to the brain. Descending tracts carry motor commands from the brain to muscles and glands. The spinal cord also processes reflexes, rapid automatic responses that do not require brain involvement. When you touch something hot and jerk your hand away before you even consciously register pain, that is a spinal reflex, a circuit connecting sensory neurons to motor neurons through interneurons in the spinal cord. The peripheral nervous system divides into the somatic nervous system and the autonomic nervous system. The somatic nervous system controls voluntary movements and carries sensory information. It includes the cranial nerves, 12 pairs emerging from the brain, and the spinal nerves, 31 pairs emerging from the spinal cord. These nerves branch extensively, reaching skin, muscles, and joints throughout the body. The autonomic nervous system controls involuntary functions: heart rate, digestion, breathing rate, pupil dilation, glandular secretion. It operates largely unconsciously, adjusting organ function to maintain homeostasis. The autonomic system divides into sympathetic and parasympathetic divisions, which often have opposing effects. The sympathetic division prepares the body for activity, for the fight or flight response. It increases heart rate, dilates airways, shunts blood to muscles, releases glucose into the bloodstream, dilates pupils. The parasympathetic division promotes rest and recovery, the rest and digest state. It slows heart rate, stimulates digestion, constricts pupils, conserves energy. These two divisions balance each other, their activity varying with the body's needs. The nervous system does not work alone. It collaborates closely with the endocrine system, the body's other major communication network, where the nervous system sends rapid electrical signals along specific pathways. The endocrine system sends slower chemical signals through the bloodstream. These signals are hormones, molecules secreted by endocrine glands directly into the blood, traveling throughout the body and affecting any cell with receptors for that particular hormone. The major endocrine glands include the pituitary, thyroid, parathyroids, adrenals, pancreas, and gonads. The pituitary gland, a pea-sized structure hanging from the base of the brain, is often called the master gland because it secretes hormones that regulate other endocrine glands. Growth hormone, secreted by the pituitary, promotes growth in children and helps maintain muscle and bone mass in adults. Thyroid-stimulating hormone tells the thyroid gland to release thyroid hormones. Adrenocorticotropic hormone stimulates the adrenal glands. Prolactin stimulates milk production. The pituitary also secretes oxytocin, involved in childbirth and social bonding, an antidiuretic hormone, which regulates water balance by controlling urine concentration. The pituitary itself is controlled by the hypothalamus, which produces releasing and inhibiting hormones that travel a short distance through a specialized blood vessel system to the pituitary, instructing it to secrete or suppress its own hormones. This hypothalamic pituitary axis links the nervous system and endocrine system, allowing the brain to regulate hormonal function based on sensory information and internal states. The thyroid gland, located in the neck, secretes thyroid hormones that regulate metabolism, the rate at which cells convert nutrients into energy. These hormones affect nearly every cell in the body, increasing energy expenditure, heat production, and protein synthesis. Too much thyroid hormone causes anxiety, weight loss, rapid heartbeat. Too little causes fatigue, weight gain, slow heartbeat. The thyroid also secretes calcitonin, which helps regulate blood calcium levels by promoting calcium deposition in bone. The parathyroid glands, 4 tiny glands embedded in the thyroid, secrete parathyroid hormone, which raises blood calcium levels by stimulating bone breakdown, increasing calcium absorption in the intestines, and reducing calcium loss in urine. Calcium is critical for muscle contraction, nerve signaling, blood clotting, and bone strength, so its level in blood is tightly controlled through the balance of calcitonin and parathyroid hormone. The adrenal glands sit atop the kidneys, each consisting of 2 parts with different functions. The adrenal medulla, the inner part, secretes epinephrine and norepinephrine, also called adrenaline and noradrenaline, hormones that mediate the fight or flight response. These hormones increase heart rate, blood pressure, and blood glucose, preparing the body for immediate action. The adrenal cortex, the outer part, secretes several types of steroid hormones. Cortisol regulates metabolism and helps the body respond to stress. Aldosterone regulates sodium and potassium balance, affecting blood pressure and fluid balance. The adrenal cortex also produces small amounts of sex hormones. The pancreas functions both as an exocrine gland, secreting digestive enzymes into the small intestine, and as an endocrine gland, secreting hormones into the blood. Clusters of cells called pancreatic islets or islets of Langerhans contain different cell types that secrete different hormones. Beta cells secrete insulin, which lowers blood glucose by promoting glucose uptake into cells and storage as glycogen. Alpha cells secrete glucagon, which raises blood glucose by stimulating glycogen breakdown and glucose release from the liver. These two hormones work in opposition to keep blood glucose within a narrow range despite fluctuations in food intake and energy expenditure. The gonads, the testes in males and ovaries in females, produce sex hormones in addition to their reproductive functions. Testes secrete testosterone, which promotes development of male reproductive structures. Secondary sexual characteristics like facial hair and deep voice and muscle growth. Ovaries secrete estrogens and progesterone, which regulate the menstrual cycle, maintain pregnancy, and promote development of female reproductive structures and secondary characteristics like breast development and widened hips. The pineal gland, a small structure deep in the brain, secretes melatonin in response to darkness, helping regulate sleep-wake cycles. The thymus gland, located in the chest, is involved in immune system development, particularly maturation of certain white blood cells. Various other tissues secrete hormones in addition to their primary functions. The heart secretes atrial natriuretic peptide, which promotes sodium excretion and lowers blood pressure. The stomach and intestines secrete hormones that regulate digestion and appetite. Adipose tissue secretes leptin, which signals energy stores and affects appetite and metabolism. Hormones work through receptors, proteins on or in target cells that bind specific hormones and trigger cellular responses. Water-soluble hormones like insulin and epinephrine cannot cross cell membranes and bind to receptors on the cell surface, initiating cascades of chemical reactions inside the cell. Lipid-soluble hormones, like steroid hormones and thyroid hormones, can cross membranes and bind to receptors inside the cell, often in the nucleus, where they directly affect gene expression, turning genes on or off. Hormonal regulation typically involves negative feedback loops. When a hormone's level or its effect reaches a certain point, it signals the endocrine gland to stop secreting, preventing excess. For example, when thyroid hormone levels rise, they inhibit the hypothalamus and pituitary from secreting the hormones that stimulate thyroid hormone release, bringing levels back down. When blood glucose rises, insulin is secreted, lowering glucose, which then reduces insulin secretion. These feedback loops maintain homeostasis, keeping variables within optimal ranges. Now, let us turn to the cardiovascular system, the transport network that delivers oxygen and nutrients to cells and removes carbon dioxide and waste products. The cardiovascular system consists of the heart, a muscular pump, and blood vessels, tubes through which blood flows. Blood itself is considered a connective tissue, consisting of cells suspended in a liquid matrix called plasma. The heart lies in the chest, slightly left of center, within the mediastinum, the space between the lungs. It is enclosed in a double-layered sac called the pericardium, which anchors the heart and prevents overfilling. A small amount of fluid between the layers lubricates the heart's movement as it beats. The heart wall consists of 3 layers. The epicardium is the outer layer. The myocardium is the thick middle layer of cardiac muscle that does the work of pumping. The endocardium is the smooth inner layer that lines the chambers and covers the valves. The heart has 4 chambers, 2 atria, the upper chambers that receive blood, and 2 ventricles, the lower chambers that pump blood out. The right atrium receives deoxygenated blood from the body via the superior and inferior vena cavae, large veins that drain the upper and lower body. Blood flows from the right atrium through the tricuspid valve into the right ventricle. When the right ventricle contracts, it pumps blood through the pulmonary valve into the pulmonary arteries, which carry blood to the lungs for oxygenation. Blood returns from the lungs via the pulmonary veins to the left atrium. It flows through the mitral valve into the left ventricle. When the left ventricle contracts, it pumps blood through the aortic valve into the aorta, the body's largest artery, which branches to deliver oxygenated blood to all tissues. The heart's contractions follow a coordinated sequence called the cardiac cycle. During diastole, the relaxation phase, the heart fills with blood. During systole, the contraction phase, the ventricles pump blood out. The valves ensure one-way flow. Atrioventricular valves, the tricuspid and mitral, prevent backflow from ventricles to atria. Semilunar valves, the pulmonary and aortic, prevent backflow from arteries to ventricles. The closing of these valves produces the sounds of the heartbeat, the familiar lub-dub which can be heard with a stethoscope. The heart generates its own rhythm through specialized cardiac muscle cells in the sinoatrial node, located in the right atrium. These pacemaker cells spontaneously depolarize, creating electrical impulses at a regular rate, typically 60 to 100 times per minute at rest. The impulse spreads across the atria, causing them to contract. It then reaches the atrioventricular node, the only electrical connection between atria and ventricles. After a brief delay, allowing the atria to fully contract and the ventricles to fill, the impulse travels down the bundle of His, which splits into right and left bundle branches, and then spreads throh Purkinje fibers to the ventricular muscle, causing the ventricles to contract from the apex upward, efficiently ejecting blood. This intrinsic rhythm can be modified by the autonomic nervous system. Sympathetic stimulation increases heart rate and force of contraction. Parasympathetic stimulation via the vagus nerve slows heart rate. Hormones like epinephrine also affect heart function. This regulation allows the heart to adjust its output to meet the body's changing needs, pumping more blood during exercise, less during rest. Blood vessels form a closed system through which blood circulates. Arteries carry blood away from the heart. They have thick, elastic walls that can stretch to accommodate the surge of blood with each heartbeat and recoil to maintain pressure between beats. As arteries extend from the heart, they branch into smaller arteries, then into arterioles, which have smooth muscle in their walls. Contraction or relaxation of this muscle regulates blood flow to different tissues, directing more blood to active areas, less to inactive areas. Arterioles branch into capillaries, the smallest and most numerous vessels, with walls only 1 cell thick. It is across capillary walls that exchange occurs. Oxygen and nutrients diffuse from blood into tissues. Carbon dioxide and waste products diffuse from tissues into blood. The capillary network is so extensive that nearly every cell in the body is within a fraction of a millimeter of a capillary. Capillaries converge into venules, which merge into veins that carry blood back to the heart. Veins have thinner walls than arteries and lower pressure. Many veins, especially in the legs, contain one-way valves that prevent backflow and assist the return of blood to the heart against gravity. Skeletal muscle contractions during movement compress veins, pushing blood toward the heart. Breathing also aids venous return. Pressure changes in the chest during inhalation draw blood toward the heart. Blood consists of formed elements suspended in plasma. Plasma is about 90% water with dissolved proteins, nutrients, hormones, gases, and waste products. The formed elements include red blood cells, white blood cells, and platelets. Red blood cells, or erythrocytes, are by far the most numerous, about 5 million per microliter of blood. They are specialized for oxygen transport, packed with hemoglobin, a protein containing iron that binds oxygen. Red blood cells have no nucleus or organelles, maximizing space for hemoglobin. They are shaped like biconcave discs, a shape that increases surface area for gas exchange and allows flexibility to squeeze through narrow capillaries. Red blood cells live about 120 days, continuously broken down and replaced. Production occurs in red bone marrow, stimulated by the hormone erythropoietin, which the kidneys secrete in response to low oxygen levels. Iron from old red blood cells is recycled to make new hemoglobin. White blood cells, or leukocytes, are part of the immune system, defending against infection and disease. They are less numerous than red blood cells, about 7,000 per microliter, but increase during infection. There are several types of white blood cells, each with specific roles. Neutrophils, the most abundant, engulf bacteria and cellular debris. Lymphocytes include B cells, which produce antibodies, and T cells, which attack infected cells and coordinate immune responses. Monocytes develop into macrophages, large phagocytic cells that consume pathogens and dead cells. Eosinophils combat parasites and are involved in allergic reactions. Basophils release histamine and other chemicals involved in inflammation. Platelets, or thrombocytes, are cell fragments involved in blood clotting. When a blood vessel is injured, platelets adhere to the damaged area, releasing chemicals that attract more platelets and initiate a cascade of reactions. Clotting factors, proteins in plasma, are activated in sequence, each activating the next, amplifying the response. The final step converts fibrinogen, a soluble plasma protein, into fibrin, insoluble threads that form a mesh trapping blood cells and creating a clot that seals the wound. Once healing is complete, the clot dissolves. This process must be precisely regulated. Too little clotting leads to excessive bleeding. Too much leads to inappropriate clot formation that can block vessels, causing heart attacks or strokes. Blood performs many functions beyond transport. It regulates pH through buffering systems that neutralize acids and bases. It regulates body temperature by distributing heat from metabolically active tissues to the skin, where it can be released. It maintains fluid balance, as proteins in plasma create osmotic pressure that helps retain water in blood vessels. The lymphatic system works alongside the cardiovascular system, managing fluid balance and immunity. As blood flows through capillaries, fluid leaks out into surrounding tissues, driven by blood pressure. Most of this fluid returns to capillaries, but some remains in tissues as interstitial fluid. If this fluid accumulated, tissues would swell. The lymphatic system collects this excess fluid, now called lymph, and returns it to the bloodstream. Lymphatic vessels begin as lymphatic capillaries, tiny tubes in tissues that collect lymph. These capillaries merge into larger lymphatic vessels that eventually drain into lymphatic trunks and ducts, which empty into large veins near the heart. Lymph flow is driven by muscle contractions and breathing, as lymphatic vessels, like veins, contain one-way valves. Along lymphatic vessels are lymph nodes, small bean-shaped structures that filter lymph. Lymph nodes contain immune cells that detect and respond to pathogens. When you have an infection, nearby lymph nodes may swell as immune cells proliferate. Clusters of lymph nodes are found in the neck, armpits, and groin, regions where lymphatic vessels from different body areas converge. The lymphatic system includes other organs. The spleen, located in the upper left abdomen, filters blood, removing old red blood cells and pathogens, and contains immune cells that respond to blood-borne infections. The thymus, in the chest, is where T lymphocytes mature. Tonsils, located in the throat, are clusters of lymphoid tissue that guard against ingested and inhaled pathogens. Patches of lymphoid tissue in the walls of the small intestine, called Peyer's patches, monitor intestinal contents for pathogens. The immune system, involving the lymphatic system and various cells and molecules, defends against pathogens and abnormal cells. Immunity has two branches: innate immunity and adaptive immunity. Innate immunity provides immediate, non-specific defense. It includes physical barriers like skin and mucous membranes, chemical barriers like stomach acid and antimicrobial substances in secretions, and cellular defenses like phagocytes that engulf pathogens. Inflammation is an innate response, increasing blood flow to damaged or infected areas, bringing immune cells and signaling molecules, causing redness, heat, swelling, and pain. Adaptive immunity develops more slowly but is specific and has memory. B lymphocytes recognize specific antigens, molecules on pathogens or foreign substances, and produce antibodies, proteins that bind antigens and mark them for destruction or neutralization. Each B cell produces antibodies specific to one antigen. When activated by encountering its antigen, a B cell proliferates, producing many copies of itself. Some become plasma cells that secrete large amounts of antibody. Others become memory cells that persist for years, ready to respond rapidly if the same antigen appears again. This is the basis of immunity following infection or vaccination. T lymphocytes also recognize specific antigens but do so differently. Helper T cells coordinate immune responses, activating B cells and other immune cells. Cytotoxic T cells directly attack infected or abnormal cells, releasing substances that induce the target cell to die. Regulatory T cells suppress immune responses, preventing excessive or misdirected attacks on the body's own tissues. The cardiovascular, lymphatic, and immune systems illustrate the principle of integration. Blood circulates, delivering nutrients and oxygen, collecting waste. Lymph drains, maintaining fluid balance, surveying for threats. Immune cells patrol, ready to respond. The nervous system monitors and adjusts heart rate, blood pressure, and vessel diameter. The endocrine system releases hormones that affect blood cell production, fluid balance, and immune function. No system acts alone. Each depends on the others, and together they maintain the internal stability that life requires. As we continue, we will explore the systems that bring materials into the body and expel waste, that exchange gases with the air, that process nutrients, that filter blood and regulate composition, each adding another layer to our understanding of how structure serves function, how diversity creates unity, how complexity emerges from simple principles, repeated and refined across scales of organization. We have journeyed through the networks of communication and transport, through nerves that carry signals at the speed of thought, through vessels that deliver life to every cell. Now we turn to the systems that interface with the world beyond the body, that bring in what we need and remove what we no longer require. We explore the respiratory system, the digestive system, the urinary system, each one a gateway, each one a processor, each one essential to the continuous exchange that keeps us alive. The respiratory system exists for a single fundamental purpose: gas exchange. Every cell in your body requires oxygen to produce energy and generates carbon dioxide as a waste product. The respiratory system brings oxygen from the air into the blood and removes carbon dioxide from the blood into the air. This exchange occurs continuously, every moment of your life, without pause, without thought, approximately 15,000 times each day as you breathe in and out. The respiratory system divides into two parts: the upper respiratory tract and the lower respiratory tract. The upper tract includes the nose, nasal cavity, pharynx, and larynx. The lower tract includes the trachea, bronchi, and lungs. Air enters through the nose or mouth, though nasal breathing is preferred because the nasal cavity conditions the air, warming it, humidifying it, and filtering it. The nasal cavity is lined with mucous membrane, tissue that secretes mucus, a sticky substance that traps dust, pollen, bacteria, and other particles. Tiny hair-like structures called cilia cover the surface of the membrane. These cilia beat in coordinated waves, moving mucus and trapped particles toward the throat, where they are swallowed and destroyed by stomach acid or coughed out. The nasal cavity also contains olfactory receptors, cells that detect odor molecules, sending signals to the brain that create the sense of smell. Air passes from the nasal cavity into the pharynx, the throat, a chamber shared by the respiratory and digestive systems. The pharynx divides into three regions: the nasopharynx behind the nose, the oropharynx behind the mouth, and the laryngopharynx at the bottom, where the pathways for air and food diverge. Air continues into the larynx, the voice box, while food passes into the esophagus. During swallowing, a flap of cartilage called the epiglottis closes over the opening of the larynx, preventing food from entering the airway. If food does enter, coughing forcefully expels it, a protective reflex. The larynx contains the vocal cords, folds of tissue that vibrate when air passes between them, producing sound. The tension and position of the vocal cords determine pitch and tone. The mouth, tongue, and lips shape these sounds into speech. The larynx also protects the airway below, its cartilage framework keeping the passage open. Air flows from the larynx into the trachea, the windpipe, a tube about 12 centimeters long, reinforced with C-shaped rings of cartilage. These rings prevent the trachea from collapsing but remain incomplete at the back, allowing the esophagus, which lies behind the trachea, to expand when swallowing food. The trachea, like the nasal cavity, is lined with ciliated mucous membrane that traps and removes particles. The trachea divides into two primary bronchi, one entering each lung. The right lung is larger and has 3 lobes. The left lung has 2 lobes, smaller to accommodate the heart. Each primary bronchus branches into secondary bronchi, one for each lobe, which branch into tertiary bronchi, which branch further into smaller and smaller bronchioles. This branching pattern, reminiscent of a tree, creates approximately 23 levels of division, increasing surface area and distributing air throughout the lungs. The smallest bronchioles end in clusters of tiny air sacs called alveoli. Each lung contains approximately 300 million alveoli, providing a surface area for gas exchange of about 70 square meters, roughly the size of a tennis court, packed into the volume of your chest. This vast surface area is critical because gas exchange depends on diffusion, the passive movement of molecules from areas of high concentration to areas of low concentration. And diffusion is more efficient across large surfaces. Each alveolus is surrounded by a network of capillaries. The barrier between air in the alveolus and blood in the capillary is extremely thin, consisting of the alveolar cell, the capillary cell, and their fused basement membranes, together less than 1 micrometer thick. Oxygen diffuses across this barrier into the blood, where it binds to hemoglobin in red blood cells. Carbon dioxide diffuses from blood into the alveolus to be exhaled. This exchange happens rapidly and continuously as blood flows through the lungs. The alveoli are coated with a thin film of fluid containing surfactant, a mixture of lipids and proteins secreted by certain alveolar cells. Surfactant reduces surface tension, preventing the alveoli from collapsing when you exhale. Without surfactant, the effort required to inflate the lungs would be enormous, and breathing would be exhausting. Premature infants sometimes lack sufficient surfactant, leading to respiratory distress. The lungs are enclosed in a double-layered membrane called the pleura. The visceral pleura adheres to the lung surface. The parietal pleura lines the chest wall and diaphragm. Between these layers is the pleural cavity, a thin space filled with a small amount of fluid that lubricates the surfaces, allowing them to slide smoothly as the lungs expand and contract. The pressure in the pleural cavity is lower than atmospheric pressure, creating a suction that keeps the lungs inflated against the chest wall. Breathing, or ventilation, is the mechanical process of moving air in and out of the lungs. It occurs through changes in the volume of the thoracic cavity, which create pressure gradients. During inhalation, the diaphragm, a dome-shaped muscle separating the thoracic and abdominal cavities, contracts and flattens, increasing the vertical dimension of the chest. The external intercostal muscles, located between the ribs, contract, lifting the rib cage upward and outward, increasing the front to back and side to side dimensions. These actions increase thoracic volume, decreasing pressure inside the lungs below atmospheric pressure, and air flows in. During quiet exhalation, the process is passive. The diaphragm and intercostal muscles relax. The elastic recoil of the lungs and chest wall decreases thoracic volume. Pressure inside the lungs rises above atmospheric pressure, and air flows out. During forceful exhalation, such as when blowing out a candle or coughing, the internal intercostal muscles and abdominal muscles contract, actively decreasing thoracic volume and pushing air out more rapidly. Breathing is controlled by the respiratory centers in the brainstem, specifically the medulla oblongata and pons. These centers generate the basic rhythm of breathing, sending signals to the diaphragm and intercostal muscles. The rhythm adjusts automatically based on feedback from chemoreceptors, sensors that detect carbon dioxide, oxygen, and pH levels in blood and cerebrospinal fluid. Rising carbon dioxide or falling pH, indicating increased acidity, stimulates faster and deeper breathing to expel carbon dioxide and restore balance. Falling oxygen levels also stimulate breathing, though carbon dioxide is the primary regulator under normal conditions. You can voluntarily control your breathing to some extent, holding your breath or breathing rapidly, because the cerebral cortex can override the brainstem centers. However, this override is limited. If you hold your breath, carbon dioxide builds up, and eventually the chemoreceptor signals become so strong that the brainstem forces you to breathe, regardless of conscious intent. The respiratory system does more than exchange gases. It regulates blood pH by controlling carbon dioxide levels. It enables speech and vocalization. It allows you to detect odors. It participates in immune defense, trapping and removing pathogens. It even plays a role in blood pressure regulation. Certain cells in the lungs convert angiotensin I, a molecule involved in blood pressure control, into angiotensin II, a more active form. The respiratory system links intimately with the cardiovascular system. The right side of the heart pumps blood to the lungs. The left side pumps blood to the body. These circuits work in series, one feeding into the other. Blood leaving the right ventricle is low in oxygen and high in carbon dioxide. It flows through pulmonary capillaries, where gas exchange occurs, then returns to the left atrium oxygenated and ready to be distributed. Any disruption in one system affects the other. Heart failure can cause fluid to back up into the lungs, impairing gas exchange. Lung disease can strain the heart by increasing resistance to blood flow through the lungs. Now let us explore the digestive system, the system that processes food, extracting nutrients and energy, eliminating what cannot be used. The digestive system is a long muscular tube, the gastrointestinal tract or alimentary canal, extending from mouth to anus, approximately 9 meters in length, with associated organs that assist digestion. This tube is technically outside the body, a tunnel passing through you, its lining continuous with your skin at both ends. Digestion involves both mechanical and chemical processes. Mechanical digestion physically breaks food into smaller pieces, increasing surface area for chemical digestion. Chemical digestion uses enzymes to break chemical bonds, splitting large molecules into smaller ones that can be absorbed. Carbohydrates are broken down into simple sugars. Proteins are broken down into amino acids. Lipids are broken down into fatty acids and glycerol. These small molecules can cross the intestinal lining into the blood or lymph. Digestion begins in the mouth. Teeth mechanically break food through chewing or mastication, grinding and tearing food into smaller pieces, mixing it with saliva. Saliva, secreted by 3 pairs of salivary glands, contains water, mucus, and enzymes. Salivary amylase begins breaking down starch into smaller carbohydrates. Mucus lubricates food, making it easier to swallow. Saliva also contains lysozyme, an enzyme that kills bacteria, and immunoglobulin A, an antibody that binds pathogens. The tongue manipulates food, mixing it with saliva, and shapes it into a bolus, a rounded mass ready to be swallowed. Swallowing is a complex coordinated process involving both voluntary and involuntary actions. You voluntarily push the bolus to the back of your mouth with your tongue. Then reflexes take over. The soft palate rises, closing off the nasal cavity. The larynx elevates, and the epiglottis folds down, protecting the airway. Muscles in the pharynx contract in sequence, pushing the bolus into the esophagus, a muscular tube about 25 centimeters long connecting the pharynx to the stomach. The esophagus propels food through peristalsis, waves of muscle contraction that move along the tube. Circular muscle behind the bolus contracts, squeezing the tube closed. Circular muscle ahead of the bolus relaxes, opening the tube. Longitudinal muscle shortens the tube, pulling it over the bolus. This coordinated pattern pushes food downward, regardless of body position. You can swallow while upside down. Gravity assists, but is not required. At the lower end of the esophagus, a ring of muscle called the lower esophageal sphincter relaxes to allow food into the stomach. This sphincter usually remains contracted, preventing stomach contents from flowing backward into the esophagus. When it fails to function properly, stomach acid can reflux into the esophagus, causing heartburn. The stomach is a muscular sac that serves as a temporary storage site and continues digestion. Its walls contain 3 layers of smooth muscle oriented in different directions, allowing the stomach to churn food, mixing it with gastric juice, a solution secreted by glands in the stomach lining. Gastric juice contains hydrochloric acid, which creates a pH of about 2, acidic enough to kill most bacteria and denature proteins, unfolding them so enzymes can access their bonds. Gastric juice also contains pepsin, an enzyme that breaks down proteins into smaller peptides. Mucus secreted by the stomach lining protects the stomach wall from its own acid and enzymes. The stomach also secretes intrinsic factor, a protein necessary for absorption of vitamin B12 in the small intestine. Without intrinsic factor, B12 deficiency develops, leading to anemia and neurological problems. The stomach mixes and breaks down food into a semi-liquid paste called chyme, which is released in small amounts into the small intestine through the pyloric sphincter, a ring of muscle at the stomach's exit. The small intestine, approximately 6 meters long, is where most chemical digestion and nutrient absorption occur. It divides into 3 regions: the duodenum, the first 25 centimeters, the jejunum, the next 2.5 meters, and the ileum, the remaining 3.5 meters. The duodenum receives chyme from the stomach and secretions from the pancreas and liver. The pancreas is both an endocrine and exocrine gland. Its endocrine function, secreting insulin and glucagon, we have discussed. Its exocrine function involves secreting pancreatic juice into the duodenum. Pancreatic juice contains bicarbonate, which neutralizes the acidic chyme from the stomach, raising pH to a level optimal for intestinal enzymes. It also contains digestive enzymes. Pancreatic amylase continues breaking down carbohydrates. Trypsin and chymotrypsin break down proteins. Pancreatic lipase breaks down lipids, and nucleases break down nucleic acids. The liver, the body's largest internal organ, weighing about 1.5 kilograms, performs hundreds of functions. In digestion, it produces bile, a greenish fluid containing bile salts, cholesterol, and pigments from broken down hemoglobin. Bile salts emulsify fats, breaking large fat droplets into smaller ones, increasing surface area for lipase to act. Bile is stored and concentrated in the gallbladder, a small sac attached to the liver. When fatty food enters the duodenum, the gallbladder contracts, releasing bile through the common bile duct into the duodenum. The liver also processes nutrients absorbed from the intestine. Blood from the small intestine does not go directly into general circulation, but first travels through the hepatic portal vein to the liver. The liver filters this blood, removing toxins and pathogens, regulating nutrient levels, storing glucose as glycogen, converting amino acids, synthesizing proteins, and breaking down old red blood cells. The liver is a chemical processing plant, constantly adjusting the composition of blood to maintain homeostasis. The lining of the small intestine is highly specialized for absorption, Its surface is folded into circular folds which increase surface area. Each fold is covered with tiny finger-like projections called villi, which further increase surface area. Each villus is covered with epithelial cells that have microscopic projections called microvilli on their exposed surface, creating a brush border. These layers of folding increase the absorptive surface area to approximately 200 square meters, about the size of a tennis court within the confines of your abdomen. Within each villus is a capillary network and a lymphatic vessel called a lacteal. Nutrients absorbed by the epithelial cells pass into these vessels. Simple sugars and amino acids enter capillaries and travel to the liver. Fatty acids and glycerol are reassembled into triglycerides within the epithelial cells, packaged with proteins into particles called chylomicrons, and released into lacteals. These chylomicrons enter the lymphatic system and eventually enter the bloodstream, bypassing the liver initially. Absorption is both passive and active. Some nutrients diffuse across the epithelial cells down concentration gradients. Others are actively transported, requiring energy and specific carrier proteins. Water absorption is largely passive, following the movement of solutes. The small intestine absorbs approximately 9 liters of water per day, most of it from digestive secretions rather than from ingested fluids. The large intestine, or colon, approximately 1.5 meters long, absorbs water and electrolytes from the remaining indigestible material, forming solid waste. The large intestine houses trillions of bacteria. The gut microbiota, which ferment undigested carbohydrates, producing short-chain fatty acids that the colon can absorb and use for energy. These bacteria also synthesize certain vitamins, like vitamin K and some B vitamins. The relationship between humans and gut bacteria is mutualistic. We provide them with habitat and nutrients. They assist with digestion and produce beneficial compounds. Material moves through the large intestine slowly, allowing time for water absorption. The consistency of waste depends on how much water is absorbed. Insufficient absorption results in diarrhea. Excessive absorption results in constipation. Peristalsis in the colon is intermittent, occasionally producing mass movements that push material into the rectum, the final segment of the large intestine. The rectum stores feces until elimination. Stretch receptors in the rectal wall detect filling and initiate the defecation reflex. The internal anal sphincter, composed of smooth muscle, relaxes involuntarily. The external anal sphincter, composed of skeletal muscle, is under voluntary control, allowing you to delay defecation until socially appropriate. The digestive system illustrates several principles of organ structure. It demonstrates specialization, with each region adapted to specific tasks. It shows how surface area is maximized through folding. It reveals integration, depending on the nervous system for control, the cardiovascular system for transport, the endocrine system for regulation. Hormones secreted by the stomach and intestines regulate digestive secretions, stomach emptying, and appetite. The enteric nervous system, a network of neurons in the digestive tract wall, coordinates peristalsis and secretion, functioning semi-independently, though influenced by the autonomic nervous system. Now we turn to the urinary system, the system responsible for filtering blood, regulating fluid and electrolyte balance, maintaining pH, and eliminating metabolic wastes. The urinary system consists of 2 kidneys, 2 ureters, the urinary bladder, and the urethra. The kidneys are bean-shaped organs, each about 12 centimeters long. located on either side of the vertebral column in the posterior abdominal wall behind the peritoneum. Despite their modest size, the kidneys receive approximately 20% of cardiac output, about 1 liter of blood per minute, because their filtering function requires abundant blood flow. Each kidney contains approximately 1 million nephrons, the functional units of the kidney. A nephron consists of a renal corpuscle, where filtration occurs, and a renal tubule, where filtrate is modified. The renal corpuscle includes a glomerulus, a ball of capillaries, surrounded by a Bowman's capsule, a cup-shaped structure. Blood enters the glomerulus under high pressure. Water and small solutes are forced across the capillary walls into Bowman's capsule, forming filtrate. Blood cells and large proteins remain in the blood because they are too large to cross the filtration barrier. The filtrate flows into the renal tubule, which has several segments: the proximal convoluted tubule, the nephron loop or loop of Henle, the distal convoluted tubule, and the collecting duct. As filtrate passes through these segments, its composition changes dramatically. About 99% of the filtrate is reabsorbed, returning to the blood. Useful substances like glucose, amino acids, vitamins, and most water and electrolytes are reclaimed. Waste products and excess substances remain in the filtrate, now called urine. Reabsorption occurs through epithelial cells lining the tubule. Some substances move passively, following concentration or electrical gradients. Others move actively, requiring energy and specific transporters. The proximal convoluted tubule reabsorbs about 65% of filtered water and sodium, as well as all filtered glucose and amino acids under normal conditions. If blood glucose exceeds the kidney's reabsorption capacity, as in uncontrolled diabetes, glucose appears in urine. The loop of Henle establishes a concentration gradient in the kidney medulla, the inner region. This gradient allows the kidney to produce urine more concentrated than blood, conserving water when necessary. The descending limb of the loop is permeable to water, but not to solutes. Water moves out into the surrounding medulla, concentrating the filtrate. The ascending limb is impermeable to water, but actively transports sodium and chloride out, diluting the filtrate. This countercurrent mechanism creates and maintains the medullary gradient. The distal convoluted tubule and collecting duct fine-tune urine composition. Aldosterone, a hormone from the adrenal cortex, increases sodium reabsorption and potassium secretion here, regulating electrolyte balance and blood pressure. Antidiuretic hormone, secreted by the pituitary, increases water permeability of the collecting duct, allowing more water to be reabsorbed, concentrating urine and conserving water. When you are dehydrated, ADH levels rise and you produce small amounts of concentrated urine. When you are well hydrated, ADH levels fall and you produce larger amounts of dilute urine. Tubular secretion also occurs, moving substances from blood into tubular fluid. Hydrogen ions and potassium ions are secreted to regulate pH and potassium balance. Many drugs and toxins are secreted into urine for elimination. This combination of filtration, reabsorption, and secretion allows the kidneys to precisely control the composition of body fluids. Urine drains from collecting ducts into the renal pelvis, a funnel-shaped structure in the kidney's center. From there, it flows down the ureters, muscular tubes about 30 centimeters long, propelled by peristalsis. The ureters enter the urinary bladder, a hollow muscular organ that stores urine. The bladder wall contains smooth muscle called the detrusor muscle. As the bladder fills, stretch receptors in its wall detect increasing volume. When volume reaches about 200 to 400 milliliters, you feel the urge to urinate, though the bladder can hold considerably more. Urination, or micturition, is controlled by two sphincters. The internal urethral sphincter, smooth muscle at the bladder neck, is involuntary. The external urethral sphincter, skeletal muscle surrounding the urethra just below the bladder, is under voluntary control. To urinate, the detrusor muscle contracts, the internal sphincter relaxes reflexively, and you voluntarily relax the external sphincter, allowing urine to flow through the urethra and out of the body. The urethra is shorter in females, about 4 centimeters, than in males, about 20 centimeters, because in males it passes through the penis and also serves as a passage for semen. The kidneys regulate more than just waste elimination. They control blood volume and pressure by adjusting water and sodium excretion. They regulate electrolyte levels, maintaining sodium, potassium, calcium, and phosphate within narrow ranges critical for nerve and muscle function. They regulate pH by secreting hydrogen ions and reabsorbing bicarbonate. They secrete erythropoietin, stimulating red blood cell production. They activate vitamin D, converting it to its most active form, essential for calcium absorption and bone health. They produce renin, an enzyme that initiates a cascade regulating blood pressure. The kidneys illustrate the concept of autoregulation, the ability of an organ to maintain consistent function despite changes in blood pressure. Within certain limits, the kidneys maintain constant blood flow and filtration rate by adjusting the diameter of arterioles. This ensures stable kidney function across a range of physiological conditions. The urinary system demonstrates the body's commitment to homeostasis. Despite wide variations in fluid intake, diet, and metabolic activity, the kidneys maintain stable internal conditions. They balance what comes in with what goes out, adjusting excretion to match intake and production. This balancing act continues constantly, every moment, every day, throughout life, a quiet regulation that we rarely notice unless it fails. We have now explored systems that bring materials in, that exchange gases, that process nutrients, that filter and regulate. We see patterns emerging, specialization combined with integration, structure enabling function, regulation maintaining balance. The respiratory system depends on the cardiovascular system to transport gases. The digestive system depends on the cardiovascular system to distribute nutrients. The urinary system filters what the cardiovascular system delivers. The nervous and endocrine systems coordinate all of it. Each system is distinct yet inseparable from the whole, like instruments in an orchestra, each playing its part, together creating something greater than the sum of individual contributions. you.